Hello. It started with a single hair tie. Not the kind Rachel usually wore. This one was hot pink with a small metal charm. I found it wedged between our bedroom couch cushions on a Tuesday evening while searching for the TV remote. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about something so trivial, but Rachel had been acting strange lately. Really strange. The previous week, she'd forgotten her phone at home 3 times. Rachel, who ran her entire real estate business from that iPhone, suddenly becoming forgetful? The same woman who once drove back 40 minutes in rush hour traffic because she left her phone charging? Something wasn't adding up. But it wasn't just the phone. The late nights at open houses had become more frequent. Her usually meticulous schedule was now filled with last-minute cancellations of our dinner plans. She'd started wearing perfume I didn't recognize. Something musky and masculine that made my nose wrinkle. When I asked about it, she claimed it was a new client's signature scent that had transferred during a house showing. Right. That night, after finding the hair tie, I decided to stay up and wait for her. She'd texted earlier saying she had a difficult client and would be home late. At 11:43 p.m., I heard her key in the lock. She stumbled slightly entering our bedroom, her blazer askew, lipstick slightly smudged. "Hey baby," she said, her words a little too careful. "Sorry I'm so late. The Hendersons are just impossible to please. They rejected another house today." I held up the hair tie. "Is this from Mrs. Henderson too?" The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. A slight widening of the eyes, a quick dart of her tongue across her lower lip. Then, just as quickly, her features smoothed into practiced innocence. "Oh, that must be Brittany's," she said, referring to her assistant. "She's always leaving her stuff everywhere when we do property paperwork." "Funny," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Because Brittany wears her hair in a buzz cut. Has for the past year. Remember how much you complained about it not being professional enough for the agency?" Rachel's face hardened. The mask of innocence dropped completely, replaced by something cold and calculating I'd never seen before. She took a step toward me, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "What exactly are you implying, David?" I stood up slowly, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I think you know exactly what I'm implying. The late nights, the forgotten phone, the new perfume. And now this." I tossed the hair tie onto the bed between us. "Who is he, Rachel?" She laughed, then a sharp, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "He? Oh honey, you have no idea, do you?" The way she said it made my blood run cold. There was something in her tone, a sort of vicious glee, that told me I was about to discover something far worse than I'd imagined. Rachel's next words hit me like a physical blow. "You know Linda from my office? The one you thought was just my mentor?" Her lips curved into a cruel smile. "We've been sleeping together for months. And that's not even the best part." I stood there, trying to process what she was saying. Linda, the elegant woman in her 50s who'd taken Rachel under her wing when she first started in real estate. The same Linda who'd sat at our dinner table countless times, offering career advice and sharing industry stories. The woman whose husband was my golf partner. "But there's more," Rachel continued, clearly enjoying my shock. "Remember all those weekend conferences I attended? Those team-building retreats? Well, Linda and I weren't alone. We had quite the little circle going. Kaylee from marketing, Heather from accounting, even sweet little Ashley from reception." My mind was spinning. Each name she dropped was another knife in my gut. These weren't strangers. These were people I knew. People who'd been in our home, who'd smiled at me across conference tables at holiday parties. "Why?" It was all I could manage to say. "Because I could," she replied simply. "Because it was exciting. Because watching you play the dutiful husband, so proud of your successful wife, made it even better. Do you know how many times I came home from being with them and kissed you goodnight? How many times I made up stories about late meetings when I was actually in Linda's beach house with the others? I felt physically ill. 5 years of marriage, and I'd never seen this side of her. This calculating, cruel person who seemed to take pleasure in my pain. The best part?" she continued, walking to her closet. "I've documented everything." She pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Every encounter, every lie, every time I played you for a fool. I even kept photos. Want to see? That's when something in me snapped. Not in the way you might expect, no yelling, no violence. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I looked at this woman, this stranger wearing my wife's face, and felt nothing but cold clarity. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I think Linda's husband Robert might be more interested in seeing those photos, and I'm sure the state licensing board would love to hear about how you and your supervisor have been conducting business. The smirk froze on Rachel's face. You wouldn't dare. You know what's funny? I said, already dialing. All those times you were busy with your circle, I was having lunch with Robert discussing real estate law. Did you know he's on the state ethics board? In fact, he's been investigating complaints about improper relationships between supervisors and agents. Fascinating stuff. The color drained from Rachel's face as understanding dawned. Her precious journal slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. David, wait she started. But I was already walking out of the room, phone to my ear. Robert? Yeah, I know it's late. Listen, there's something you need to know about Linda and Rachel. The next 48 hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of chaos. Robert, to his credit, acted swiftly and decisively. By morning, Linda was suspended pending investigation. By afternoon, the entire circle had been called in for questioning about potential ethical violations. Rachel tried everything to stop the inevitable collapse. First came the tears, big, theatrical sobs about how she'd made a terrible mistake, how she'd let power and success go to her head. When that didn't work, she switched to threats, promising to destroy my reputation in our social circle with elaborate lies about abuse and neglect. Nobody will believe you, she hissed, watching me pack my essential belongings. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. I just smiled, continuing to fold my clothes. You mean the kind of man who has documented every threatening text you've sent in the last 24 hours? The kind who recorded your confession about the affairs and your attempts at blackmail? That kind of man. Her face went through a fascinating series of expressions. Shock, rage, fear, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation. The house is in my name, she said triumphantly. Where are you going to go? Actually, I replied, zipping up my suitcase. You might want to check those documents again. Remember last month when you were too busy to attend the refinancing meeting? You gave me power of attorney to sign on your behalf. Funny thing about paperwork, details matter. The truth was, I'd suspected something was wrong for longer than I'd admitted, even to myself. The refinancing meeting had been my first concrete step toward protecting myself. I'd had our lawyer add some specific clauses about property division in case of infidelity. Rachel, too caught up in her affairs to pay attention, had signed everything without reading. But the real hammer fell that evening. While Rachel was desperately trying to salvage her career, I received an unexpected call from Ashley, the receptionist. She was the youngest member of Rachel's circle, and apparently the one with a conscience. There's something you need to know, she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't just the affairs. Rachel, she's been embezzling from client accounts. Linda helped her set it up, but Rachel's the one who's been moving the money. They've been using the affairs to blackmail some of us into staying quiet. I sat down heavily, the phone nearly slipping from my hand. How much money are we talking about?
Millions, Ashley whispered.
I have proof documents, transfer records, everything. I've been keeping copies as insurance. Rachel threatened to ruin my career if I ever talked. But I can't do this anymore. I'm sending everything to the FBI tomorrow morning. I looked at the ceiling, thinking about the joint accounts Rachel and I shared, the investments we'd made together, all the financial threads of our lives intertwined. Then I thought about her smirk when she'd offered to show me photos of her affairs, the cruel pleasure she'd taken in destroying our marriage. Send them to me first, I said quietly. Give me 12 hours before you contact the FBI. There's something I need to do. Those 12 hours changed everything. While Rachel slept fitfully in our guest room, I began methodically untangling our financial web. The documentation Ashley provided revealed a pattern of sophisticated fraud going back 3 years. Rachel hadn't just been stealing from clients. She'd been laundering money through our joint investments, using my legitimate business connections as cover. I sat in my home office, watching the sun rise through the window, feeling the weight of every decision that had led us here. The woman sleeping down the hall wasn't just my unfaithful wife anymore. She was a criminal who had deliberately entangled me in her schemes. Each investment we'd made together, each property we'd purchased, was potentially tainted. At 7 a.m., I called my lawyer, Timothy. He listened in silence as I laid out everything, the affairs, the fraud, the blackmail. "David," he said finally, "you need to understand something. Given the scale of this fraud and your joint accounts, you could be implicated. We need to act immediately to protect you." I glanced at the folder of evidence on my desk. "I know. That's why I'm calling. I need you to help me do something that might seem counterintuitive." Over the next few hours, I executed a plan that would either save or destroy me. First, I transferred every cent from our joint accounts into a new account in Rachel's name alone. Then, I signed over my stake in our investment properties to her. On paper, it looked like I was giving her everything. Rachel found me in the kitchen around noon, her face showing confusion at my calm demeanor. "I've been thinking," I said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter to her. "You're right. This is your house, your life. I'm giving you everything." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Everything. The accounts, the properties, all of it. I just signed the papers." I pushed a folder toward her. "You win, Rachel." She picked up the documents, scanning them with growing disbelief. "Why would you?" "Because I'm done," I said simply. "I don't want anything that's been touched by our marriage. I just want out." A slow smile spread across her face, that same cruel, victorious smile from 2 nights ago. She didn't notice me checking my watch, didn't realize I was counting down the minutes. "I always knew you were weak," she said, gathering the papers. "Too afraid to fight for what's yours." I watched her walk away, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. In her triumph, she didn't notice the sound of cars pulling into our driveway, didn't hear the footsteps approaching our front door. The doorbell rang at exactly 1 p.m., right on schedule. Rachel opened the door to find 2 FBI agents, Robert from the ethics board, and Ashley standing on our front steps. The color drained from her face as she recognized the badges, the warrant, the thick stack of documents in Ashley's trembling hands. "Rachel Mitchell," one of the agents began, "we need to speak with you about certain financial irregularities in your real estate transactions." I watched from the kitchen doorway as reality crashed down around her. Her perfectly manicured hands clutched the papers I'd just given her, the very documents that now implicated her as the sole owner of all our fraudulent investments. In trying to take everything, she'd unknowingly accepted full responsibility for her crimes. "You," she whispered, turning to me with dawning horror. "You knew." "I did," I replied quietly. "Just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you involved me in your schemes. The difference is, I found out in time to protect myself." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The FBI seized our computers, files, phones. They found Rachel's journal, full of not just her affairs but detailed records of money movements, blackmail attempts, everything. Her careful documentation of her betrayals became the perfect evidence against her. Linda was arrested that same afternoon. Kaylee and Heather quickly turned state's evidence, desperate to save themselves. But Ashley's testimony, combined with the documentation she'd preserved, was the cornerstone of the case. She'd been gathering evidence for months, waiting for the right moment to come forward. "Why didn't you just turn me in directly to the FBI?" Rachel asked later, as agents escorted her out of our house. "Why go through this elaborate scheme?" I looked at this woman I'd once loved, now a stranger in handcuffs, and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. "Because you needed to understand something. Every time you thought you were cleverly manipulating someone, every time you felt that thrill of power and control, you were actually digging your own grave." I just gave you the shovel and watched you dig. The aftermath was messy, as these things always are. The investigation revealed that Rachel's crimes went deeper than anyone suspected. She'd been running similar schemes at her previous agency, using her network of affairs to create a web of silence and complicity. The total amount stolen topped $8 million. I testified at her trial 3 months later. She sat at the defendant's table, still beautiful, still projecting that aura of confident control. But when the judge announced her sentence, 18 years for fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy, I saw that mask finally crack. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I ran into Ashley. She'd been promoted at a different agency, her whistleblower status actually helping her career in an industry suddenly obsessed with ethical conduct. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked as we stood in the autumn sunlight. "The way you handled everything?" I thought about the nights I'd spent piecing together Rachel's deceptions, the weight of keeping quiet when I discovered the truth, the calculated risk of letting her think she'd won one final time. "No," I said finally. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting someone else. It's about letting them hurt themselves." As I drove home to my new apartment across town, I thought about the journal Rachel had taunted me with that first night. She'd written every detail of her betrayals, thinking they were proof of her cleverness, her power over others. In the end, those same words testified against her in court, each page adding months to her sentence. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos. Bye.